You'll die out there, Vivian. A woman like you, in this storm. You'll freeze before midnight. Sheriff Dalton Reeves stood blocking the stable door, his words cutting sharper than the wind howling through Black Hollow Ridge. Behind him, half the town watched, waiting for the fat nurse to finally know her place. But Vivian Mercer didn't step back. She tightened the straps on her medical bag and met his eyes without flinching. Then I'll die trying. That man up there deserves better than bleeding out alone because this town's too comfortable to care. What happened next would shatter everything Black Hollow Ridge believed about courage, survival, and the woman they'd spent years underestimating. This is the story of a nurse nobody believed in, a mountain beast everyone feared, and a love born inside a storm that nearly killed them both. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came down from the mountains like something with teeth. Vivian felt it clawing at the shutters of the medical clinic as she worked by lamplight, organizing supplies that would probably sit unused for another week. Black Hollow Ridge wasn't the kind of town that trusted a woman with medicine, especially not one who looked like her. They preferred Doc Brennan, even though he was half drunk most days and hadn't successfully set a broken bone in 3 years. She didn't care anymore. Or at least, that's what she told herself every morning when she tied her hair back and pretended the whispers didn't follow her down Main Street. The clinic door slammed open. Vivian spun, instinctively reaching for the nearest scalpel, but it was just Tommy Bridger, one of the trappers who worked the Northern Territories. His face was ghost white, his breath coming in ragged gasps that fogged the freezing air. "Miss Mercer," he stumbled forward, catching himself on the examination table. "You gotta come. It's Ronan Vale." The name hit the room like a gunshot. Vivian's spontaneity stilled over the bandages she'd been folding. "What happened?" "Grizzly," Tommy's voice cracked. "Tore him apart 2 days ago. He's holed up in his cabin, bleeding out. I tried to patch him, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And he's... Miss Mercer, he's dying." She moved before she could think, grabbing her heavy coat from the hook. "How far?" 12 miles, maybe more in this weather." Tommy glanced toward the window, where snow was already starting to fall in thick, angry sheets. "But the trail's gonna be..." "I know what the trail's like." Vivian cut him off, her hands already packing supplies into her medical bag. Tourniquets, carbolic acid, morphine, needle, and thread. Everything she'd need for traumatic wounds if there was anything left to save. Tommy watched her with something between relief and terror. "You're really gonna go? Did you think I wouldn't?" He hesitated. Most folks wouldn't. Not for him. Vivian knew what he meant. Ronan Vale wasn't a man people worried about. He was a ghost story the town told itself. A massive, scarred hermit who'd walked into the mountains 5 years ago and never came back. Some said he'd murdered a man in a card game gone wrong. Others claimed he'd gone feral, living more like an animal than anything human. Vivian had never met him, but she'd heard the stories and she knew what they really meant. Ronan Vale was someone Black Hollow Ridge had decided didn't deserve help. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "Let's go." They made it halfway to the stables before Sheriff Dalton Reeves stepped into their path. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. The town loved him. Vivian had learned to hate him within a week of arriving in Black Hollow Ridge. "Evening, Miss Mercer." His voice was smooth, almost friendly. "Tommy, where are we headed in such a hurry?" Tommy opened his mouth, but Vivian spoke first. "Medical emergency. Excuse us." Dalton didn't move. "What kind of emergency?" "The kind that's none of your business unless you're bleeding." She tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her again. His smile widened. "Now, that's not very neighborly. Tommy here looks like he's seen a ghost, and you're packing enough supplies for a battlefield." His gaze flicked over her heavy coat, her bag. "So I'll ask again, where are you going?" Tommy shot Vivian a nervous glance, but she held Dalton's stare. "Ronan Vale's cabin. He's been injured. I'm going to treat him." The change in Dalton's expression was instant. The smile vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. "No, you're not." "I wasn't asking for permission." "Then let me be clear." Dalton stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Ronan Vale is a dangerous man. He's got no business being saved. and you've got no business risking your life for him, especially not in a storm like this." Vivian's jaw tightened. "He's a human being who's dying. That's all the business I need." "You think you can make it 12 miles up a mountain trail in a blizzard?" Dalton's voice dripped with condescension. "Look at yourself, Vivian. You're not built for this. You'll freeze, or you'll fall, or you'll get lost, and then I'll have to send men up there to find your body." The words landed exactly the way he intended. Vivian felt the heat rising in her face, the familiar sting of humiliation she'd spent years trying to ignore. But she didn't look away. "I'm going," she said quietly. Dalton laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "You're serious. Move." Jesus Christ, he shook his head, turning to Tommy. "You brought this on yourself, Bridger. When she dies out there, it's on you." Tommy flinched, but Vivian pushed past the sheriff without another word. She heard him call after her, something about liability, about making her own choices. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she stopped, she'd start believing him. Back. The stable was warm compared to the street, filled with the smell of hay and horses. Vivian moved quickly, saddling her mare with practiced efficiency. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. Tommy hovered near the door. "Miss Mercer, if you want to wait until morning, he'll be dead by morning." "I know, but—" He glanced back toward the street, where a small crowd had started to gather. Word traveled fast in Black Hollow Ridge, especially when it was something worth mocking. "People are talking. They're saying you're crazy." "They've been saying that since I got here." Vivian tightened the saddle straps, checking them twice. "Doesn't make it true. Sheriff's right about one thing, though. That trail's a killer even in good weather, and you—" He stopped himself, but the damage was already done. Vivian turned to face him. "Say it." "You what, Tommy?" He looked miserable. "You're not exactly— climbing mountains. It takes— I'm fat." Vivian's voice was flat. "That's what you're trying to say. I'm too fat to survive the trail." Tommy's face went red. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." She grabbed her bag, slinging it over the saddle horn. "And maybe you're right. Maybe I'll fall. Maybe I'll freeze. But I'm still going, because that man up there doesn't deserve to die alone just because this town decided he wasn't worth the effort." She swung herself up into the saddle, awkwardly, ungracefully, exactly the way the town expected. Her mare shifted beneath her, adjusting to the weight, but held steady. Tommy stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You're braver than anyone I've ever met." "I'm not brave." Vivian gathered the reins. "I'm just tired of being told what I can't do." She rode out into the storm. Bishek. The crowd parted as she passed. Vivian kept her eyes forward, refusing to meet their stares, but she heard the whispers anyway. "Poor thing's gonna get herself killed. Bet she doesn't make it past Miller's Creek. Should have known better than to let a woman like her think she's capable of, The voice cut off as Sheriff Dalton stepped into the street, watching her ride toward the edge of town. He didn't try to stop her again. He just stood there, arms crossed, his expression somewhere between pity and contempt. Vivian kicked her mare into a trot. The wind hit her the moment she left the shelter of the buildings, a brutal, freezing gust that stole her breath. Snow swirled around her in blinding sheets, turning the world into a gray-white void. She pulled her scarf up over her nose and mouth, squinting against the cold. The trail started a quarter-mile outside town, barely visible in the storm. Vivian guided her mare toward it, feeling the ground shift from packed dirt to loose stone. The horse balked, sensing danger, but Vivian urged her forward. Behind her, Black Hollow Ridge disappeared into the snow. Ahead, the mountains waited. The first hour was hell. The trail climbed steeply, winding through dense pine forest where the snow fell so thick Vivian could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her mare picked her way carefully over ice-slicked rocks, but every step felt like a gamble. One wrong move, one stumble, and they'd both go tumbling down the ravine that yawned to their left. Vivian's hands were numb inside her gloves. Her face burned from the cold, and her thighs ached from gripping the saddle. She'd ridden before, plenty of times, but never like this. Never through a storm that felt like it was actively trying to kill her. She thought about turning back. It would be easy. No one would blame her. They'd probably celebrate it, in fact, proof that she'd finally learned her limits. But then she thought about Ronan Vale. alone in his cabin, bleeding out while infection ate through his body. She thought about the look on Dalton's face when he told her she wasn't built for this. She kept going. The trail narrowed as the forest thinned, giving way to exposed rock and sheer drops. The wind screamed across the open face of the mountain, strong enough to push her sideways in the saddle. Her mare whinnied, ears pinned back, but Vivian leaned forward and spoke to her in a low, steady voice. "Easy, girl. We're almost there." She had no idea if that was true. The second hour was worse. The trail vanished beneath a drift of snow so deep her mare had to plow through chest high. Vivian dismounted, leading the horse by hand, her boots sinking with every step. Her medical bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. She thought about Dalton again, about the way he'd looked at her body like it was something weak, something broken. She thought about every person who'd ever told her she couldn't. She kept walking. By the third hour, she couldn't feel her feet anymore. The snow had soaked through her boots, turning her toes into blocks of ice. Her fingers were stiff claws inside her gloves. She'd lost the trail completely now, navigating by instinct and the faint shape of the ridge above her. Her mare stumbled. Vivian grabbed the reins, pulling her upright, but the horse's breathing was labored, her sides heaving. They couldn't keep this pace. If she pushed any harder, the mare would collapse. She looked around, searching for shelter, and saw it, a dark shape through the snow. A cabin tucked against the base of a cliff. Relief hit her so hard she almost fell. She dragged her mare the last 100 yards, every step in agony. The cabin was small, rough-built from logs and stone, with a chimney that leaked smoke into the storm. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Vivian tied her mare under a crude lean-to, then shouldered her bag and stumbled toward the entrance. The door opened before she could knock. The man in the doorway was massive. Vivian had expected someone big. Trappers and mountain men usually were. But Ronan Vale was something else entirely. He stood at least 6'5", with shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. His face was all hard angles and old scars, half hidden beneath a thick, dark beard. His eyes were pale gray, sharp despite the fever-bright glaze dulling them. And he was holding himself upright with one hand braced against the doorframe, his other arm wrapped around his midsection. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandages covering his torso. "You're the nurse," he said. His voice was a low rasp, rough from pain. Vivian nodded, too cold to speak. Ronan stepped back, letting her inside. "Didn't think you'd come." She pushed past him into the cabin, her eyes adjusting to the dim firelight. The space was small, one room, sparsely furnished, with a bed shoved against the far wall. Blood stained the floorboards near the fire. The air smelled like copper and sweat and something darker, something rotten. Infection. Vivian dropped her bag and turned to Ronan. "Sit down before you fall down." He stared at her for a long moment, then lowered himself onto the edge of the bed with a grimace. The movement made him hiss through his teeth, and fresh blood seeped through the bandages. Vivian knelt in front of him, her hands already reaching for the wrappings. "Tell me what happened." "Grisly." Ronan's breathing was shallow, uneven. "Came at me while I was checking traps. Got me across the ribs and stomach before I put it down." 2 days ago? 3, maybe. Hard to tell. Vivian peeled back the bandages and her stomach dropped. The wounds were worse than she'd imagined. 4 massive claw marks raked across his torso, deep enough that she could see muscle and bone. The edges were ragged, already turning black with necrosis. Pus oozed from the deepest gash, thick and yellow-green. "Jesus," she whispered. Ronan watched her face. "Bad? Bad enough." She forced her voice steady, professional. "You should be dead already." "I'm stubborn. You're an idiot for not coming down to town." He almost smiled. "Town doesn't want me." Vivian met his eyes. "Well, I'm here now, so shut up and let me work." She worked through the night. First, she cleaned the wounds with carbolic acid, ignoring Ronan's strangled curses as the disinfectant burned through infected tissue. Then she debrided the necrotic edges, cutting away dead flesh until she reached something that still bled red. The smell was overwhelming, but she breathed through her mouth and kept going. Ronan didn't scream. He bit down on a leather strap and gripped the edge of the bed hard enough to make the wood creak. But he didn't scream. Vivian stitched what she could, tight, careful sutures that pulled torn muscle back together. The deepest wound wouldn't close properly. It was too ragged, too infected. She packed it with clean bandages soaked in iodine and prayed it would be enough. By the time she finished, dawn was breaking outside. Gray light filtered through the cabin's single window, revealing just how much blood covered the floor. Ronan had passed out somewhere around the second hour of stitching. His breathing was shallow but steady, his fever still burning hot beneath her hand. Vivian sat back on her heels, every muscle in her body screaming. She was exhausted, freezing, starving. But he was alive. For now. She stood, swaying slightly, and moved to the fire to add more wood. The storm was still raging outside, howling around the cabin like something trying to get in. She wouldn't be able to leave. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. She was trapped here with a man she didn't know, in a wilderness that wanted them both dead. Vivian looked at Ronan's unconscious form, at the rise and fall of his massive chest beneath the fresh bandages. "Don't you die on me," she said quietly. "I didn't climb this damn mountain just to watch you quit." She pulled a blanket around her shoulders and settled into the chair by the fire. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, for the first time in 3 days, Ronan Vale slept without bleeding. Vivian woke to the sound of something crashing. She jerked upright in the chair, her neck screaming from the angle she'd slept at, and saw Ronan on the floor beside the bed. He'd tried to stand, tried, and failed. And now he was on his hands and knees, breathing hard, fresh blood seeping through the bandages she'd spent half the night applying. "What the hell are you doing?" She scrambled out of the chair, her legs stiff and protesting. "Need to check the traps." His voice was thick, slurred. The fever was worse. "You need to get back in bed before you tear every stitch I put in you. Animals will starve. I don't care about the animals." Vivian grabbed his arm, or tried to. He was too big, too heavy, like trying to move a boulder. "Ronan, listen to me. You stand up right now, you're going to bleed out on this floor, and then we're both screwed because I can't drag your corpse anywhere." He turned his head to look at her, and she saw it then, the glaze of delirium in his pale eyes. He wasn't fully conscious. His body was running on instinct, on years of survival routines that didn't account for being half dead. "The traps," he said again. Vivian made a decision. She moved in front of him, blocking his path to the door, and put both hands on his face. His skin was burning up, slick with sweat despite the cold. "Look at me," she said firmly. "The traps can wait. You can't. Now get back in that bed, or so help me I will knock you unconscious myself." For a moment she thought he might fight her. His jaw tightened, and she felt the muscles in his neck cord beneath her palms. But then something shifted in his expression. Confusion? Maybe. Or recognition. "You're still here," he said, like he'd just realized it. "Where else would I be?" "Thought you'd leave. Thought I dreamed you." Vivian's throat tightened. "You didn't dream me. Now come on." She helped him up, mostly by bracing herself against his weight and praying he wouldn't collapse on top of her. They made it back to the bed in an awkward shuffle, and when he finally sank down onto the mattress, the relief on his face was immediate. "Sorry," he muttered. "Don't be sorry. Just don't do it again." She pulled the blankets up over him, then went to stoke the fire. The cabin was freezing, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and made your teeth ache. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. She checked his bandages, peeling back the layers of cloth with careful fingers. The wounds looked marginally better, still angry and red, but the pus had slowed. The fever, though, was the real problem. It was burning through him like wildfire, and she didn't have enough supplies to fight it properly. "When did you last eat?" she asked. Ronan's eyes were closed. "Don't remember." "That's what I figured." Vivian stood and surveyed the cabin, looking for anything resembling food. She found a sack of cornmeal in a corner cupboard, some dried venison hanging from a rafter, and a jar of something that might have been preserves at one point, but now looked questionable. She got to work. The fire was temperamental, spitting smoke every time she added wood, but eventually she managed to get a pot of water boiling. She made a thin gruel from the cornmeal and shredded some of the venison into it, creating something that was more substance than flavor, but would at least keep them alive. When she brought a bowl to Ronan, he was awake again, watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You need to eat," she said, "not hungry." "I don't care. Eat it anyway." He took the bowl with hands that shook slightly. She watched him struggle with the first few bites, his body clearly wanting to reject anything solid, but he forced it down. When he'd managed about half, he set the bowl aside and leaned back against the wall. "You always this bossy?" he asked. "Only when people try to die on me." Vivian ate her own portion standing up, too restless to sit. The cabin felt smaller in daylight, more claustrophobic. She could see every crack in the logs, every stain on the floor. This was where Ronan had been living for 5 years, alone. "Why didn't you come down to town?" The question was out before she could stop it. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. "You've met the people in Black Hollow Ridge. You really need to ask? They're not all bad. Most of them are." He shifted, wincing. "And the ones who aren't don't want me around anyway. Easier to stay up here." "Easier to die up here, you mean?" "Maybe." He looked at her. "Why'd you come? Tommy tell you I was a lost cause?" "Tommy told me you were bleeding out. That was enough." "Sheriff must have loved that," Vivian snorted. "Sheriff tried to stop me, said I'd freeze to death before I made it halfway." Something flickered across Ronan's face. Anger, maybe, or disgust. "Dalton's a bastard. That's putting it mildly." She set her empty bowl down and moved to the window. The snow was still falling in thick sheets, piling up against the cabin walls. "How long do these storms usually last?" 3 days, sometimes 4. "Why?" "Because I need to know how long we're stuck here." Ronan watched her carefully. "You worried about being trapped with me?" "Should I be? Town probably told you I killed a man." Vivian turned to face him. "Did you?" "No." His voice was flat. "But I broke his jaw after he tried to force himself on a girl working at the saloon. Sheriff didn't care about the details. Just cared that I'd touched one of his friends." The pieces clicked into place. Vivian had heard the story. Everyone in Black Hollow Ridge knew it. But the version she'd been told had Ronan as the aggressor, a violent drunk who'd attacked an innocent man over a card game. "So they ran you out of town," she said. "Told me if I ever came back, they'd hang me." Ronan's expression was unreadable. "Been up here ever since?" Vivian felt something twist in her chest. She knew what it was like to be judged before anyone bothered to know the truth. She'd been dealing with it her whole life. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ronan frowned. "For what?" "For what they did to you. For believing their version without questioning it." "You didn't know." "That's not an excuse." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sense that he was seeing straight through her, past all the walls she kept up. "They treat you like that too, don't they?" he said finally. "Make you feel like you're wrong just for existing." Vivian's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Ronan's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I see the way you move, like you're trying to take up less space, like you're apologizing for being here." "I'm not apologizing for anything." "Good, you shouldn't have to." The words hit her harder than she expected. She turned away, blinking against the sudden burn in her eyes, and busied herself with checking the fire. They sat in silence for a while after that. Vivian reorganized her medical supplies, more for something to do than out of necessity. Ronan drifted in and out of sleep, his breathing rough but steady. By afternoon, the fever had spiked again. Vivian stripped off the top layer of blankets and sponged his forehead with cold water from the melted snow she'd boiled earlier. His skin was so hot it felt like touching a stove. "You're burning up," she said, more to herself than to him. Ronan's eyes opened, unfocused, cold. "I know, but I need to bring this fever down or it's going to cook your brain." "Maybe that'd be better." "Don't talk like that." She kept sponging, working methodically across his forehead, his neck, his chest. The scars covering his body were impossible to ignore, some old and faded, others still pink and raised. He'd lived a hard life. That much was clear. "Vivian?" She paused. It was the first time he'd said her name. "What?" "Thank you." His voice was barely a whisper. "For coming, for staying." Her throat went tight. "Don't thank me yet. You're not out of the woods." "Still." His hand found hers, his grip weak but deliberate. No one's done this. For me." Vivian looked down at their joined hands. His was massive, rough with calluses, and hers was small by comparison, soft from years of indoor work. They didn't match, but somehow They fit. Get some rest, she said, pulling her hand away before the moment could mean more than she was ready for. I'll keep watch. The second night was worse than the first. Ronan's fever broke around midnight, drenching him in sweat and leaving him shivering so violently the bed frame rattled. Vivian piled every blanket she could find on top of him and built the fire up until the cabin felt like a furnace, but nothing seemed to help. Talk to me, she said, trying to keep him conscious. Tell me about something. Anything. Like what? His teeth were chattering. I don't know. Why'd you come to Black Hollow Ridge in the first place? Work. He paused, struggling to get the words out through the shaking. Heard they needed trappers. Figured I could disappear up here, start over. Where were you before? St. Louis. Had a wife. Had a daughter. Vivian went still. Had? Fever took them, both of them, same week. His voice cracked. I tried everything. Nothing worked. They were gone. Ronan couldn't stay there after. Everywhere I looked, I saw them. So I left, came here. Thought maybe if I went far enough away, it wouldn't hurt so much. Did it work? He laughed, a broken sound. What do you think? Vivian didn't know what to say to that. She'd never lost anyone the way he had. Her family had abandoned her years ago when she'd refused to marry the man they'd chosen, but that was different. That was a choice. I'm sorry, she said finally. It felt inadequate, too small for the weight of what he'd told her. But it was all she had. Ronan's shaking started to ease. The fever was dropping, finally responding to the cold compresses and the sheer stubborn force of his will. You ever lose someone? He asked. Not like that. But I've lost myself a few times. The words came out before she could stop them. Spent years trying to be what other people wanted, smaller, quieter, less me. Didn't work. Just made me miserable. So what changed? I stopped trying. Vivian pulled a blanket tighter around her own shoulders. Figured if people were going to hate me anyway, I might as well give them a real reason instead of just existing wrong. Ronan almost smiled. That why you became a nurse? To spite people? Partly. Mostly because I like fixing things. She glanced at him. Even stubborn jackasses who try to die in the mountains. I wasn't trying to die. Could have fooled me. They lapsed into silence again, but it was different this time. More comfortable. Like they'd crossed some invisible line and landed somewhere neither of them had expected. By the third morning, Ronan was strong enough to sit up on his own. Vivian watched him carefully as he swung his legs over the side of the bed, ready to catch him if he fell, but he managed it without help. The bandages were holding, and when she checked the wounds, she saw the first real signs of healing, pink tissue starting to form at the edges, the infection finally retreating. You're lucky, she said, applying fresh wrappings. Another day and this would have killed you. Feels like it still might. That's just the pain. You'll live. Ronan caught her wrist as she reached for the iodine. I mean it, Vivian. Thank you. She met his eyes and saw something there that made her chest ache. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition. Like he was seeing her the same way she was starting to see him, not as the stories people told, but as the person underneath. You're welcome, she said softly. The storm finally broke that afternoon. Vivian stepped outside for the first time in 3 days and nearly wept at the sight of clear sky. The world was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow, blinding white in the sunlight, but the wind had stopped. The mountains stretched out around them, jagged and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human survival. Her mare was still alive, huddled under the lean-to and looking miserable but unharmed. Vivian fed her some of the dried grass she found stored in a corner of the shelter and checked her over for frostbite. Everything seemed intact. We could leave tomorrow, Ronan said from the doorway. He was leaning heavily against the frame, his face pale but alert. Trail should be passable by then. Vivian turned to look at him. You're not going anywhere for at least a week, maybe 2. I've walked on worse. I don't care. You ripped those stitches, all of this was for nothing. She crossed her arms. Besides, I need to make sure the infection's really gone before I let you out of my sight. Ronan's expression shifted, something that might have been hope if she was reading it right. So you're staying? For now? Vivian, Don't argue with me. I didn't climb this mountain twice just to watch you kill yourself being stubborn. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. All right? Yeah. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You're kind of terrifying when you're giving orders. Figure I better listen. Despite herself, Vivian laughed. Smart man. That night, they ate together at the small table by the fire. More of the cornmeal gruel, but Vivian had managed to make it taste almost edible by adding some wild herbs she'd found in Ronan's sparse supplies. He ate slowly, still weak, but his color was better. Can I ask you something? Ronan said. Depends on what it is. Why'd you really come up here? And don't say it's because you're a nurse. There's plenty of people in Black Hollow Ridge who need help. You could have ignored Tommy's request. Vivian set down her spoon. She'd been expecting this question, but that didn't make it easier to answer. I came because I was tired of being what they expected, she said finally. Everyone in that town looks at me and sees someone who can't climb mountains, can't save lives, can't be anything other than what they decided I am. And I needed to prove them wrong, even if it was just to myself. So I was a test? No. She looked at him directly. You were a person who needed help. That's all that mattered. The rest was just bonus spite. Vivian smiled despite herself. Something like that. Ronan nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you proved your point. Yeah, well, they'll find a way to dismiss it. They always do. Maybe, but you'll know the truth. The truth. Vivian turned the phrase over in her mind. The truth was that she'd made it 12 miles through a blizzard that should have killed her. The truth was that she'd saved a man everyone else had written off as already dead. The truth was that she was stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. And maybe that was enough. They talked late into the night, the conversation wandering from Black Hollow Ridge to the mountains to the lives they'd left behind. Ronan told her about trapping, about the animals he tracked, and the seasons that ruled his life. Vivian told him about medicine, about the first time she'd stitched a wound and realized this was what she was meant to do. Somewhere around midnight, Ronan fell asleep mid-sentence, his head tipped back against the wall. Vivian covered him with a blanket and banked the fire, then settled into her chair. Outside, the mountains were silent. Inside, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She woke to Ronan screaming. Vivian lunged out of the chair, her heart hammering, and found him thrashing in the bed, his eyes wide and unseeing. Nightmare. She'd seen it before in patients, fever dreams that lingered even after the fever broke. Ronan, she grabbed his shoulders, trying to hold him still. Ronan, wake up, it's not real. He swung at her, a wild, uncoordinated movement that caught her across the shoulder and sent her stumbling back. The impact knocked the breath out of her, but she recovered quickly and came at him from a different angle. Ronan, it's me. It's Vivian. You're safe. His eyes focused slowly, the terror fading as recognition set in. He went still, his breathing ragged. Vivian? Yeah, it's me. You're okay. He looked down at his hands, then at her, and horror flooded his face. Did I hurt you? I'm fine. Let me see. It's nothing. Vivian. His voice was sharp, commanding. Let me see. She sighed and pulled down the neck of her shirt, revealing the bruise already forming on her shoulder. It wasn't bad. She'd had worse, but Ronan's expression crumpled. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I know. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. It was a nightmare. You didn't know what you were doing. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. But it's the truth. She met his eyes. You want to tell me what you were dreaming about? Ronan looked away. My daughter, I was trying to save her, but I couldn't. I never can. The pain in his voice was unbearable. Vivian reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. You can't save people who are already gone, she said quietly. All you can do is honor them by living. I don't know if I know how to do that anymore. Then maybe it's time to learn. They sat like that for a long time, her hand in his, the fire crackling softly in the background. Eventually, Ronan's breathing evened out, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Why are you being so kind to me? He asked. Because you deserve it. You don't know me well enough to say that. Maybe not. Vivian smiled slightly. But I know enough. Morning came slowly, pale light filtering through the cabin's cracks and crevices. Vivian woke to find Ronan already up, standing by the window with a cup of something that smelled like pine needle tea. He'd managed to dress himself, though the effort had clearly cost him. You should be resting, she said. Rested enough. He turned to face her. I can make it down the mountain today. Weather's clear. You're not ready. Vivian, don't Vivian me. You took a glancing blow last night in your sleep and nearly opened those wounds again. You think you can handle 12 miles of rough trail? He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. What do you want me to do? Stay here. Heal properly. Give it another week at least. And you? The question hung in the air between them. Vivian hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on keeping him alive that she hadn't considered what came after. I don't know, she admitted. You could stay too. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. Ronan, I'm not asking for anything. He set down his cup, his movements careful. But you said yourself the trail's dangerous, and you've been up here 4 days already. Another week won't make much difference. The town's going to talk. The town already talks. Ronan moved closer, and Vivian forced herself not to step back. Let them. You said you were tired of being what they expected, so don't be. Stay because you want to, or leave because you want to, but don't make the choice based on what they'll think. He was right, and that terrified her. I'll think about it, she said, but they both knew she'd already decided. The week that followed didn't feel like time passing so much as existing in a pocket outside the normal world. Days blurred together in a rhythm of wound care and meals, of conversations that started about nothing and ended up meaning everything. Vivian found herself learning the particular cadence of Ronan's silences, which ones meant he was thinking, and which ones meant he was remembering things he'd rather forget. She learned he took his coffee black and bitter, that he couldn't sleep without checking the door was barred, that he flinched whenever she moved too quickly near him, remnants of a life spent expecting violence. He learned she hummed when she was concentrating, that she had a vicious sense of humor she usually kept locked down, that she'd read every medical text she could get her hands on, but had taught herself most of what she knew through trial and error because no school would accept a woman who looked like her. That's their loss, Ronan said one morning while she was changing his bandages. The wounds were healing clean now, pink scar tissue forming over what should have killed him. Easy to say when you are not the one getting rejected. Doesn't make it less true. He watched her work with that unsettling intensity he had. You're better than any doctor I've met, and I've met a few. Vivian's hands stilled. You don't have to say things like that. I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because it's a fact. Ronan shifted, testing the pull of the stitches. How much longer before you cut me loose? Another few days. The deep one's still closing. She pressed gently around the edges of the wound, checking for heat or swelling. You push it too early, you'll split it open and we'll be back where we started. You like having an excuse to boss me around. I like keeping you alive. There's a difference. But he was smiling when he said it, and so was she. And Vivian realized with a start that this felt dangerous in a way the blizzard hadn't. The storm had been straightforward, survive or die. This was something else entirely. On the 8th day, Tommy Bridger showed up. Vivian heard the horse before she saw the rider, and her stomach dropped. She'd known someone would come eventually, the town wouldn't stay quiet forever, but she'd let herself pretend they had more time. Ronan heard it too. He was up and moving toward the rifle propped by the door before Vivian could stop him. Wait. She put herself between him and the weapon. Let me see who it is first. Vivian, just wait. She stepped outside into air so cold it burned her lungs. Tommy was dismounting near the lean-to, his face red from the wind, his expression somewhere between relief and worry. Miss Mercer. He pulled off his hat. Thank hell. We thought, well, we weren't sure what to think. I'm fine. Vivian kept her voice level, aware that Ronan was probably listening from inside. What are you doing here? Sheriff sent me to check on you, said if you were alive I should bring you back to town. Tommy glanced past her toward the cabin. How's Vale? Alive. Healing. That's good. That's real good. But Tommy didn't look relieved. He looked nervous. Miss Mercer, you need to come with me. Now. Something cold settled in Vivian's chest.
Why? Because Sheriff Reeves is gathering a posse, says Vale kidnapped you, and he's planning to come up here and bring him back to face justice. The words took a moment to land. When they did, Vivian felt her entire body go rigid with fury. Kidnapped me? Are you out of your mind? I know. Tommy held up his hands. I told him it was horse shit, but he's got the town believing it. Says a man like Vale couldn't be trusted alone with a woman, especially one who went up there to help him. He's spinning it like you're a victim. I am not a victim.
I know that, but Reeves doesn't care about the truth. He cares about having an excuse to string Vale up. Tommy's voice dropped. Miss Mercer, he's been planning this, talking about how Vale's land borders some timber territory he's had his eye on for months. If Vale's convicted or dead, that land goes back to the Territorial Claim Office, and Reeves has friends there. Vivian's mind was racing. She'd known Dalton was vindictive, but this was something else. This was calculated. When's he coming? Tomorrow, maybe the day after. Depends on how long it takes him to get enough men together who are willing to make the ride. Tommy stepped closer. You need to come back with me now. If you testify that Vale didn't hurt you, that you stayed of your own choice, it'll take the wind out of Reeves' sails. And if I don't, then Reeves comes up here with armed men and somebody's going to die. Tommy's expression was grim. Probably Vale, maybe you too if you get in the way. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Ronan stood there, one hand braced against the frame, the other resting on the hunting knife at his belt. He looked stronger than he had a week ago, but not strong enough for what was coming. Bridger, he said evenly. Vale. Tommy nodded, respectful. Heard you survived. Glad of it. You here to drag me back to town? I'm here to warn you that Reeves is coming to do exactly that. Tommy glanced between them. Miss Mercer needs to come with me. She can testify you didn't kidnap her, and that might be enough to stop this. Ronan's jaw tightened. And if it's not? Then you should run. Tonight, if you can manage it, head deeper into the mountains where they can't track you. I'm not running from my own land. Then you're a dead man. The three of them stood in tense silence, the wind cutting between them like a blade. Vivian's mind was turning over possibilities, discarding them one by one. Going back to town might buy them time, but it wouldn't stop Dalton permanently. Men like him didn't give up just because the law said no. I'll go, she said finally. Ronan's head snapped toward her. No. It's the only way to— Well, I said no. He moved down the steps, ignoring the way the movement made him wince. You go back there and testify against Reeves. You make yourself a target. He'll find a way to discredit you, or worse. He's already making me a target by claiming I was kidnapped. Then let him come. Ronan's voice was hard. I'll deal with it. You can barely stand. I can stand well enough to put a bullet in anyone who tries to take what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone should have annoyed her. Instead, it made something warm and complicated unfurl in her chest. Ronan, she said quietly, I'm not yours to protect. Like hell you're not. Tommy cleared his throat. Maybe I should give you two a minute. No. Vivian kept her eyes on Ronan. We're done here. I'm going back to Black Hollow Ridge with Tommy, and I'm going to tell the truth. That I came here of my own free will, that you never laid a hand on me, and that Sheriff Reeves is a lying bastard who's using me as an excuse to steal your land. Vivian, this isn't up for debate. Ronan stared at her, and she watched the conflict play out across his face. He wanted to argue. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists, but he also knew she was right. Fine, he said finally, but if anything happens to you, it won't. If it does, I'm burning that town to the ground. He said it so matter-of-factly that Vivian almost believed him. Maybe she should have been frightened by the casual violence in his voice. Instead, she felt something that might have been safety. She turned to Tommy. Give me 10 minutes to pack. Inside the cabin, Ronan followed her like a shadow. Vivian gathered her medical supplies with quick, efficient movements, but her mind was elsewhere. She was trying to figure out how to say goodbye to someone who'd become essential in the span of 8 days. You'll need to keep the wounds clean, she said, falling back on the familiar territory of medical instruction. Change the bandages twice a day. If you see any redness or swelling— I know. Ronan caught her wrist,
stopping her mid-motion. "Vivian, look at me." She did. His eyes were storm gray in the dim light, fierce and frightened in equal measure. "Don't let them make you small again," he said. "Whatever Reeves says, whatever the town thinks, don't let them convince you that you're anything less than what you are." Her throat went tight. "What am I?" "The bravest person I've ever met." The kiss happened before either of them planned it. One moment they were standing there, inches apart, and the next his mouth was on hers, and her hands were fisted in his shirt, and nothing else existed except the heat of him and the desperate certainty that this might be the last time. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "Come back," he said roughly. "I will. Promise me." "I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it, because Vivian had no idea what was waiting for her in Black Hollow Ridge, and neither did he. The ride down the mountain was brutal. The trail was slick with ice and snow, and twice Vivian's mare nearly went over the edge. Tommy rode ahead, silent and tense, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still following. Vivian's mind was chaos. Part of her was still in that cabin, feeling the weight of Ronan's hands on her face and the way he'd looked at her like she was something worth keeping. The other part was already in Black Hollow Ridge, preparing for the fight she knew was coming. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, it was late afternoon. The sun hung low and red over the mountains, painting everything in shades of blood and gold. Tommy reined in his horse. "You sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "Reeves isn't going to like what you have to say." "I don't care what Reeves likes." Vivian straightened in her saddle. "Where is he?" "Sheriff's office, probably. That's where he's been holding court, getting people worked up about Vale." "Then that's where I'm going." They rode down Main Street together, and Vivian felt the stairs like physical weight. Curtains twitched in windows. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered. Vivian dismounted and handed her reins to Tommy. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You've got the truth." "In this town, I'm not sure that's enough." The sheriff's office was warm compared to the street outside, a fire crackling in the potbelly stove in the corner. Dalton Reeves sat behind his desk, looking every inch the concerned lawman. He stood when Vivian walked in, his expression shifting to something that might have passed for relief if she didn't know better. "Miss Mercer." He came around the desk, hands outstretched like he was greeting an old friend. "Thank heaven you're safe. We've been so worried." "Save it, Dalton." Vivian's voice was flat. "I know what you've been telling people, and it's a lie." His hands dropped. The concerned expression vanished, replaced by something colder. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You've been spreading rumors that Ronan Vale kidnapped me, that I was held against my will." "Well, weren't you?" Dalton's smile was razor thin. "You went up there to provide medical care. You were supposed to be back within a day or two. Instead, you stayed for over a week. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to think that treating a man who was nearly gutted by a grizzly takes time." Vivian stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated. "I stayed because he needed care. I stayed because the weather was too dangerous to travel. And I stayed because I chose to. Nobody forced me to do anything." "You're sure about that?" "Don't patronize me." Dalton's expression hardened. "Miss Mercer, I understand that your time in the mountains may have been traumatic. It's not uncommon for victims to defend their captors. I am not a victim, and he is not my captor." Vivian's voice rose. "Ronan Vale treated me with more respect and decency than anyone in this town has shown me since I arrived. If you want to go after him, you'll have to find another excuse, because this one won't work." The room had gone very quiet. Vivian became aware of the people gathered in the doorway, townspeople who'd followed her from the street, drawn by the promise of drama. Dalton glanced at them, then back at her. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I think you're confused, Vivian. Perhaps the cold affected your judgment. My judgment is fine. Then explain to me why a respectable woman would willingly stay alone with a man like Vale, a man with a history of violence. He defended a woman from being assaulted. That's not violence. That's justice. He broke a man's jaw. And that man tried to rape someone." Vivian was shaking now, but not with fear, with rage.
You ran Ronan out of town because he stood up to one of your friends. Now you're trying to frame him for kidnapping so you can steal his land. Don't pretend this is about my safety." Dalton's mask finally cracked. His face went hard, his eyes glacial. "Careful, Miss Mercer. You're making some serious accusations. And you're making some serious plans to murder an innocent man. I'm protecting this town. You're protecting your wallet." The slap came out of nowhere. One moment Dalton was standing across from her, and the next his hand connected with her cheek, hard enough to snap her head sideways. The sound echoed through the office like a gunshot. Vivian tasted blood. Her ear was ringing. But she didn't fall. She turned back to face him, her hand pressed to her burning cheek, and smiled. "Witnesses," she said quietly, "you just struck an unarmed woman in front of witnesses." Dalton looked around wildly. The crowd in the doorway had grown. At least a dozen people had seen what happened, and their expressions ranged from shock to disgust. "She provoked me," Dalton said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Doesn't matter." Tommy Bridger pushed through the crowd, his face dark with anger. "You're the law in this town, Reeves. You're supposed to be better than that. Stay out of this, Bridger." "No." Tommy planted himself between Vivian and the sheriff. "I'm not going to watch you railroad Vale just because you want his land. And I'm not going to let you hurt Miss Mercer for telling the truth." Other voices rose in agreement. Not everyone, Dalton still had his supporters, but enough that the balance in the room had shifted. Dalton's jaw worked. "Everyone out. Now." Not happening. Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store, stepped forward. She was a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a spine of steel. "We want to hear what Miss Mercer has to say. This is official business. This is a public office, and we're the public." Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "So either you let her speak, or we start asking questions about why you're so determined to silence her." Dalton looked like he wanted to argue, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He stepped back, his expression venomous, and gestured mockingly toward Vivian. "Fine, speak." Vivian took a breath. Her cheek was throbbing, and she could feel the bruise forming, but her mind was clear. "Ronan Vale did not kidnap me," she said, pitching her voice to Carrie. "I went to his cabin of my own free will to provide medical treatment after he was attacked by a grizzly. I stayed because he was critically injured and because the weather made travel impossible. During that time, he never once threatened me, hurt me, or prevented me from leaving. In fact, he offered multiple times to help me get back to town despite his injuries." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Sheriff Reeves knows this. He knows because Tommy Bridger told him the truth from the beginning. But the truth doesn't serve the sheriff's purposes. What serves his purposes is a story where Ronan Vale is a dangerous criminal who needs to be removed from his land that happens to border a timber claim the sheriff has been trying to acquire for months." "That's a lie," Dalton snarled. "Is it? Then show us the property records. Show us who you've been meeting with from the territorial office." Dalton's silence was damning. Vivian pressed her advantage. "I'm not asking you to like Ronan Vale. I'm not even asking you to trust him. But I'm asking you not to participate in a murder based on fabricated charges. Because that's what this is. The sheriff wants Vale dead or imprisoned so he can take his land, and he's using me as an excuse to make it happen." Mrs. Chen looked at Dalton with disgust. "Is this true, Sheriff?" "Of course not. Then you won't mind if we send someone to check with the territorial office. See if your name's attached to any claims in that area." Dalton's face had gone purple. "You're all going to regret this." "Maybe," Mrs. Chen shrugged. "But at least we won't have a man's death on our conscience." The crowd murmured agreement. Vivian felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite relief, but close. She'd done what she came here to do. The truth was out. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. Dalton pointed a shaking finger at her. "You think you've won something here? You haven't. Vale's still a criminal, still an outcast. And you—" His lip curled. "You've just proven you're exactly what everyone suspected. A desperate woman so starved for attention that you'd throw yourself at the first man who showed you kindness, no matter how low he was." The words hit their mark. Vivian felt the old shame trying to claw its way up her throat, the familiar voice that whispered, "He's right, you're wrong, you're too much and not enough." But then she thought about Ronan, about the way he'd looked at her like she was someone extraordinary, about the kiss that had felt like coming home. "You're right,"
she said quietly. I am desperate. Desperate to be seen as a human being instead of a joke. Desperate to do work that matters instead of being dismissed because of how I look. And yes, desperate enough to ride 12 miles through a blizzard to save a stranger's life because I was tired of being told what I couldn't do. She stepped closer to Dalton, holding his gaze.
But I'm not desperate enough to stay in a town that thinks cruelty is the same as truth. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going back up that mountain. I'm going to make sure Ronan Vale finishes healing. And if you or anyone else comes after him with violence in mind, you'll have to go through me first. You're choosing him over this town? I'm choosing myself. He's just the first person who made that feel possible. Vivian turned and walked out of the sheriff's office. The crowd parted for her, and she saw respect in some of their faces. Not all. Some still looked at her with contempt or pity. But enough. Tommy fell into step beside her as she headed toward the stables. That took guts. That took stupidity. I just painted a target on both our backs. Maybe. But you also made it a lot harder for Reeves to move against Vale without looking like the villain. Harder isn't impossible. No, Tommy admitted. It's not. They reached the stables. Vivian's mare was tired, but she'd rest better in Ronan's lean-to than anywhere in this town. You really going back up there tonight? Tommy asked. Soon as I can get supplies together. It'll be dark before you're halfway there. I know. Tommy studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, give me 20 minutes. I'll put together a pack with food and extra ammunition. And Miss Mercer? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Vivian managed a tired smile. We'll see if I'm still alive in a week to appreciate that. She made it out of town just as the sun was setting. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a sky turning the color of old bruises. Vivian pushed her mare as hard as she dared, but the animal was exhausted, and the trail was treacherous in the fading light. She was 3 miles out when she heard the riders behind her. Vivian's heart seized. She urged her mare faster, but the horse had nothing left to give. The riders were gaining, their torches visible in the growing dark. She made it another half-mile before they caught up. There were 4 of them, Dalton Reeves in the lead. He looked different in the torchlight, wilder, meaner. The civilized lawman mask had come off completely. Going somewhere, Miss Mercer? He blocked the trail, his horse dancing sideways. Vivian's hand moved toward the rifle Tommy had strapped to her saddle, but one of the other men already had his weapon drawn. I wouldn't, Dalton said pleasantly. Now, I'm going to give you one more chance to be reasonable. Come back to town. Testify that Vale coerced you into defending him. Help us bring him to justice. No. Then you leave me no choice. Dalton dismounted. Boys, take her horse. Miss Mercer needs to be escorted back to town for her own protection. You can't do this. I'm the sheriff. I can do whatever I want. One of the men grabbed her mare's reins. Another reached for Vivian, and she kicked out, catching him in the chest. He stumbled back with a curse, and suddenly all 4 of them were moving toward her. Vivian went for the rifle, but she was too slow. Hands grabbed her, dragging her from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Careful with her, Dalton said. We don't want any more bruises that might raise questions. They hauled her upright. Vivian fought, but there were too many of them, and she was already exhausted from the ride down and back. Let me go. Yes. Can't do that. See, you've become a liability. Dalton stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I gave you a chance to walk away, to keep your mouth shut and let things happen the way they were supposed to. But you couldn't do that, could you? Had to play the hero. Had to tell the truth. Same thing got you in trouble. He nodded to his men. Put her in the wagon. We'll say she was confused, traumatized, that she needs rest and care. You mean you'll lock me up? I mean, I'll keep you from interfering while I handle Vale. Dalton's smile was cold. And once he's dealt with, well, accidents happen, especially to women who wander around these mountains alone. Ice flooded Vivian's veins. You're going to kill him. I'm going to do what's necessary to protect this town's interests. If Vale resists arrest, if there's a struggle, he shrugged. These things happen. They were loading her into a wagon when the shot rang out. One of Dalton's men dropped, screaming, clutching his leg. The others scattered, drawing their weapons, torches swinging wildly in the dark. Another shot, another man down. And then Ronan Vale stepped out of the trees. He looked like something out of a nightmare, massive and scarred, his face half hidden in shadow, a rifle in his hands and a hunting knife at his belt. He should have been in bed. He should have been weak. He looked ready to kill everyone in sight.
"Let her go," he said quietly. Dalton laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Or what?
You'll shoot us all? You're one man, Vale. I only need one shot to drop you. Question is whether your boys want to die protecting your land grab." The remaining men exchanged glances. One of them lowered his weapon slightly.
"He's bluffing," Dalton snapped. "Take him down." Nobody moved. Ronan took a step closer, the rifle never wavering. "Vivian, come here."
She didn't hesitate. She broke free from the hands holding her and ran to his side. The moment she was close enough, Ronan's free hand found hers and squeezed once, grounding. "You're supposed to be resting," she said. "You're supposed to be safe." "I tried." "I know." His eyes never left Dalton. "Now get behind me." Vivian moved and Ronan shifted position to keep himself between her and the sheriff's men. His breathing was labored. She could hear it, could see the way he was favoring his left side, but his aim was steady. "Here's how this is going to work," Ronan said. "You're going to get back on your horses. You're going to ride back to Black Hollow Ridge, and you're going to forget you ever saw us tonight." "You're making a mistake, Vale." "No, I'm correcting one." Ronan's voice dropped, turned lethal. "You come after her again. You even look at her wrong. I won't bother with warnings. I'll put you in the ground and burn the town down around you. We clear?" Dalton's face was white with rage, but he wasn't stupid enough to push his luck, not with two men down and the others looking mutinous. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is." Ronan smiled, and it was terrifying. "You just don't know it yet." They watched Dalton and his men retreat into the darkness. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Ronan lower the rifle. The moment he did, his knees buckled. Vivian caught him, or tried to. He was too heavy, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs. "You idiot," she said, running her hands over his torso, checking for fresh bleeding. "You complete and utter idiot. You could have killed yourself riding out here." "Couldn't let them take you. I had it under control."
"You were about to get kidnapped. I would have figured something out." Ronan laughed, breathless with pain. "Sure you would have." Vivian found wetness under her fingers. Blood. He'd torn something coming after her. "We need to get you back to the cabin," she said. "We need to get far away from here. Reeves won't let this go." "I know, but first I need to make sure you're not going to die on me."
"Wouldn't dream of it." Ronan's hand found her face, his thumb brushing over the bruise Dalton had left. His expression went dark. "He hit you." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." His voice was rough with fury. "I should have put a bullet in him." "You did the right thing." "Did I?" Ronan looked at her, and Vivian saw the fear underneath the anger. "Vivian, what have we done?" She knew what he meant. They'd crossed a line tonight. Dalton wouldn't forgive this. The town wouldn't forget it. They'd made themselves targets, and there was no going back. "We survived," she said simply. "Everything else we'll figure out as we go." Ronan pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt him shaking, from cold or adrenaline or blood loss, she wasn't sure. "I can't lose you," he said against her temple. "I know I don't have the right to say that. I know we barely know each other, but I can't." "You won't." Vivian wrapped her arms around him as best she could. "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "I already did. Remember?" They stayed like that for a long moment, two broken people holding each other together in the middle of a frozen wilderness, while the world tried its damnedest to tear them apart. Finally, Vivian pulled back. "Can you ride?" "If I have to." "You have to. We need to get back before you bleed out." Getting him onto her mare was a nightmare. He was too weak to pull himself up, and Vivian didn't have the strength to lift him. They managed it eventually through sheer stubborn will, him using the stirrup and her shoving from behind until he was draped across the saddle like a corpse. "Graceful," he muttered. "Effective." Vivian climbed up behind him, which required some creative maneuvering given their size difference and the horse's exhaustion. "Now shut up and don't fall off."
The ride back to the cabin took twice as long as it should have. Ronan kept fading in and out of consciousness, and Vivian had to keep one arm wrapped around his waist to hold him steady. By the time they reached the lean-to, her entire body was numb. Getting him inside was worse. He could barely walk, and the steps up to the door might as well have been a mountain. Vivian half-dragged, half-carried him, her muscles screaming in protest. They collapsed together just inside the threshold, the door swinging shut behind them. "Well," Ronan said after a moment, "that was stupid." "Which part?" "All of it." Vivian started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity of everything, the chase, the standoff, the nightmare ride back, hit her all at once, and she laughed until tears streamed down her face. Ronan watched her with something like wonder. "You're crying." "I'm laughing." "Could have fooled me." "Shut up." She wiped her eyes and crawled to the medical supplies. "Let me see the damage." The wound had reopened, not catastrophically, but enough that he needed fresh stitches. Vivian worked by firelight, her hands steadier than she felt, while Ronan gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound. "This is becoming a pattern," she said. "Me patching you up." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just stop getting hurt." "I'll do my best." When she finished, Vivian sat back and looked at him properly. He was pale and exhausted, covered in blood and dirt, and still somehow the most solid thing in her life. "We can't stay here," she said quietly. "Dalton will come back. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon." "I know." "So what do we do?" Ronan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We leave. Go deeper into the mountains where they can't follow. Start over somewhere they'll never find us." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He met her eyes. "Unless you'd rather go back." Vivian thought about Black Hollow Ridge, about the whispers and the judgment and the constant weight of being too much and not enough. She thought about the clinic she'd built and the few patients who'd trusted her despite everything. Then she thought about the way Ronan looked at her, like she was exactly right. "No," she said. "I don't want to go back." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Ronan pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it felt like a promise. Not of perfection or easy answers, but of choosing each other despite the cost. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin. Inside, they held each other and planned their escape, two outcasts against a world that had never wanted them. But for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them felt alone. They had 3 days before Dalton came back. Vivian knew it the way you know a storm's coming. Something in the air, a pressure building that had nowhere to go but violent. Ronan spent those days healing and preparing. He moved slowly, favoring his left side where the stitches pulled, but his hands were steady as he cleaned weapons and packed supplies. Vivian watched him work and tried not to think about what it meant that she wasn't afraid. A man with a rifle, planning for violence, she should have been terrified. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. On the second night, she caught him staring at the wall where he'd carved marks into the wood. Hundreds of them, scratched deep into the logs in groups of 5. "What are those?" she asked. Ronan didn't look at her. "Days." "Since what?" "Since they died. My wife. My daughter." His voice was flat. "Thought if I kept count, it would hurt less eventually. Thought there'd be a number where it stopped mattering." Vivian moved closer, studying the marks. There were so many. Years' worth. "Did it work?" "No, just gave me something to do besides drink myself to death." He finally looked at her. "I stopped counting when you showed up. Figured there were better things to mark time by." Something in Vivian's chest cracked open. She reached for his hand and he took it, his palm rough and warm against hers. "I'm sorry I couldn't save them," she said quietly. "You weren't there." "I know, but I'm still sorry." Ronan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that for a long time, two damaged people trying to figure out how to build something new from the wreckage. "We should leave tonight," he said eventually, "before Reeves gets organized. You're not strong enough." "I'm strong enough to keep you alive. That's all that matters." Vivian pulled back to look at him. "Ronan, if we run, if we just disappear into the mountains, we'll be looking over our shoulders forever. Dalton won't stop. Men like him never do." "So what do you want to do? Go back down there and ask nicely for him to leave us alone?" "No, I want to fight." He stared at her.
You can't be serious. Why not? He's the one breaking the law. He assaulted me in front of witnesses. He tried to kidnap me. We have proof of what he's doing. Proof doesn't mean anything when the law is on his side. Then we make it not be on his side. Vivian's mind was racing, pieces clicking together. Mrs. Chen saw what happened. Tommy knows the truth. There are people in that town who don't trust Dalton, who are starting to question him. If we can get them to stand with us, they won't. Some of them will, and that might be enough. Ronan shook his head. You're talking about going back down there, walking right into his territory. Vivian, he'll kill you. He'll try, but he won't do it in broad daylight with the whole town watching. Not if we make him look like the villain he is. And if you're wrong, then at least I'll die standing up instead of running. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. You really mean this? Yes. You're insane. Probably. Vivian managed to smile. But I'm right too. We can't run forever, and I'm tired of letting men like Dalton Reeves decide what I'm allowed to do with my life. Ronan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. If we do this, if we go back down there, I'm coming with you. You're not healed. I don't care. You think I'm letting you walk into that alone? His jaw set. We do this together or we don't do it at all. Vivian knew there was no point arguing. Together then. Together. They left before dawn on the third day. Ronan moved stiffly, but he could ride, and that was enough. Vivian kept glancing at him as they picked their way down the trail, watching for signs that he was fading. But his eyes were clear and his hands were steady on the reins. Stop worrying, he said without looking at her. I'm not worrying. You're doing that thing where you chew your lip. You only do that when you're worrying. I don't chew my lip. Yeah, you do. Right side, bottom lip. You've been doing it since we left. Vivian consciously relaxed her mouth. How long have you been paying that much attention? Since the first night. You did it while you were stitching me up. Figured it meant you were concentrating. It does. So you are worried. She shot him a look. Fine, I'm worried. Happy? Not particularly, but at least you're honest. Ronan guided his horse around a patch of ice. For what it's worth, I'm worried too. That's not comforting. Wasn't trying to be comforting. Was trying to be honest. They reached Black Hollow Ridge just after noon. The town looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier than Vivian remembered. Or maybe she was different. Hard to say. People stopped and stared as they rode down Main Street. Whispers followed them like smoke. Vivian kept her head up and her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of looking ashamed. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Dalton's horse was tied outside, which meant he was inside. Good. Vivian wanted an audience for this. She dismounted and handed her reins to Ronan. Stay here. Like hell. Ronan, we're doing this together, remember? He swung down from his horse, moving more carefully than he probably wanted her to notice. Besides, you think I'm letting you walk in there alone with that bastard? He won't do anything with people watching. He hit you last time with people watching. Vivian couldn't argue with that. Fine, but let me do the talking. Wouldn't dream of stopping you. They walked into the sheriff's office together. Dalton was sitting behind his desk, reading through some papers. He looked up when they entered, and his expression went from surprise to fury in the space of a heartbeat. Well, he said, setting the papers aside. Didn't expect to see you two again so soon. I bet you didn't. Vivian stopped in front of the desk, Ronan a solid presence at her back. We're here to file charges, Dalton laughed. Charges? Against who? Against you. For assault, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. The smile dropped off his face. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You struck me in front of witnesses. You tried to abduct me on the mountain trail, and you admitted you were planning to kill Ronan Vale and make it look like an accident. Vivian kept her voice level, professional. All of that is illegal, Sheriff. Even for you. Those are serious accusations, Miss Mercer. You have any proof? I have witnesses. Mrs. Chen saw you hit me. Tommy Bridger heard you talking about your plans for Ronan's land, and your own men were there when you tried to take me off that trail. My men will say whatever I tell them to say. Maybe. But Mrs. Chen won't. And neither will the dozen other people who watched you lose your temper. Dalton stood slowly, his hands braced on the desk. You want to know what I think? I think you've lost your mind. I think spending time alone with Vale has damaged your judgment, and now you're making wild accusations because you don't know any better. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a confused woman who's been manipulated by a violent criminal. Ronan moved forward, but Vivian held up a hand, stopping him. This was her fight. I'm not confused, she said, and I'm not manipulated. I'm angry. I'm angry that you think you can treat people like property. I'm angry that you've been running this town like your personal kingdom, and I'm angry that nobody's called you on it until now. Nobody's called me on it because I'm doing my job. Your job isn't stealing land and framing innocent men. Vale's not innocent. Dalton's voice rose. He's a murderer and he's the man who saved my life. Vivian stepped closer. And unlike you, he's never lied to me, never tried to hurt me, never treated me like I was too stupid to know my own mind. That's because he wants something from you. Yeah, he wants me to be safe. That's it. That's the whole list. Vivian's voice shook, but not with fear, with rage. You know what you want from me? You want me to shut up and disappear so you can do whatever you want without anyone questioning it. Well, I'm not disappearing. I'm standing right here, and I'm not backing down. The office had gone very quiet. Vivian became aware that people were gathering outside, drawn by the raised voices, by the spectacle. Good. Let them hear this. Dalton's face had gone an ugly shade of red. You're making a mistake. No, I'm correcting one. I could arrest you right now, both of you. On what charges? Disturbing the peace, slander. Take your pick. Try it. Vivian crossed her arms. Arrest me in front of all these witnesses and see what happens. See if they still think you're the good guy when you're dragging an unarmed woman to a cell. Dalton looked past her to the crowd forming in the doorway. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the quick assessment of whether he could get away with it. He couldn't, and he knew it. Get out, he said quietly. Not until you answer for what you've done. I said get out. His hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Ronan stepped forward, putting himself between Vivian and the sheriff. Touch that weapon, and I'll break your arm before you clear the holster. That a threat, Vale? It's a promise. The two men stared at each other across the desk. Vivian could feel the violence in the air, thick and waiting. One wrong move, and this would turn bloody. Then Mrs. Chen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Sheriff Reeves! She pushed through the crowd, her small frame somehow commanding complete attention. I think it's time we had a town meeting. Dalton's eyes snapped to her. This isn't your concern, Eleanor. The hell it isn't. You've been making decisions that affect all of us without bothering to ask what we think. Mrs. Chen planted herself next to Vivian. Miss Mercer here says you've been planning to steal Vale's land. That true? Of course not. Then you won't mind if we look at the territorial office records, see who's been filing claims in that area. This is absurd. No, what's absurd is that we've been letting you run roughshod over this town for 2 years without questioning anything. Mrs. Chen looked around at the crowd. How many of you have seen the sheriff lose his temper? How many times have we looked the other way when someone got hurt because it was easier than standing up to him? Silence. But Vivian saw people shifting, exchanging glances. That's what I thought. Mrs. Chen turned back to Dalton. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to have a town meeting, tonight, and everyone's going to get a chance to speak their piece, including Miss Mercer and Mr. Vale. After that, we'll vote on whether you keep wearing that badge. You can't do that. Watch me. Mrs. Chen's voice was steel. This is still a free town, Sheriff, and free people get to decide who protects them. Tommy Bridger appeared in the doorway, and Vivian felt a rush of relief. He looked at her, then at Ronan, then at Dalton. I'll second that, he said. Town meeting tonight, 7 o'clock at the church. Other voices rose in agreement. Not everyone. Some of Dalton's supporters were already slinking away, probably to plan their own strategy. But enough people that the balance had shifted. Dalton stood there, trapped between his desk and a room full of people who'd finally stopped being afraid of him. Vivian watched emotions flicker across his face. Rage, disbelief, calculation. Fine, he said finally. Town meeting tonight. But don't think this changes anything. It changes everything, Vivian said quietly. You just haven't figured it out yet. They left the sheriff's office together, Vivian and Ronan and Mrs. Chen. The crowd parted for them, and Vivian heard the whispers starting, some supportive, some hostile, all of them shocked. Mrs. Chen walked them to the general store. "You two need somewhere to wait until tonight. Can't have you wandering around where Reeves can cause trouble." "We can take care of ourselves," Ronan said. "I'm sure you can, but I'd feel better if you were somewhere I could keep an eye on you." She unlocked the store and ushered them inside. "Besides, you look like you could use a hot meal and a place to sit down." Vivian didn't argue. Her legs were shaking from adrenaline, and Ronan looked pale around the edges. Mrs. Chen directed them to the back room and disappeared to make tea. "That went better than expected," Ronan said, lowering himself carefully into a chair. "We're not done yet." "I know, but we're still alive and Reeves is on the defensive. That's something." Vivian paced the small room, too restless to sit. "What if nobody shows up tonight? What if everyone's too afraid of him?" "Then we figure something else out." "And if they vote to keep him as sheriff?" "Then we leave. Go somewhere he can't reach us." Ronan caught her hand as she passed, pulling her to a stop. "Vivian, whatever happens tonight, we'll handle it, together." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of what they were trying to do pressed down on her like a physical thing. Mrs. Chen returned with tea and some bread. "Eat," she ordered. "Both of you look half dead." They ate in silence. Vivian forced herself to swallow even though her stomach was in knots. She needed the energy for whatever was coming. "Can I ask you something?" Mrs. Chen said after a while. Vivian nodded. "Why are you doing this? You could have just left, gone somewhere else and started over. Why risk everything to fight Reeves?" Vivian set down her tea. "Because I'm tired of running. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not small enough to matter, and I'm done. I'm done letting people like Dalton decide what I'm allowed to be." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. "You know he's dangerous, right? Even if you win tonight, he's not going to just let this go." "I know." "And you're still doing it anyway?" "Yeah." Mrs. Chen smiled, and it was fierce. "Good. It's about time someone stood up to that bastard." The hours until 7 o'clock crawled by. Vivian tried to rest but couldn't. Her mind kept running through what she wanted to say, how she wanted to say it. She'd never spoken in front of a crowd before. The thought made her want to throw up. Ronan watched her pace, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Come here." She stopped. "Why?" "Just come here." Vivian moved to where he was sitting. He pulled her down onto his lap, carefully, mindful of his injuries, and wrapped his arms around her. "You're going to be fine," he said against her hair. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. You rode 12 miles through a blizzard to save a stranger. You stood up to Reeves when everyone else was too scared. You're the bravest person I know, Vivian. Tonight's just one more thing you'll survive." She turned to look at him. "What if I freeze up? What if I can't find the words?" "Then I'll speak for you, or Mrs. Chen will, or Tommy. You're not alone in this." The weight in her chest eased slightly. She leaned into him, breathing in the smell of pine and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." "You don't look scared." "That's because I'm good at faking it. Inside, I'm terrified." Ronan's arms tightened around her. "But I'm more scared of what happens if we don't fight, if we just let him win." "Yeah, me too." They sat like that until Mrs. Chen came to tell them it was time. The church was packed. Every bench was full, and people lined the walls, crowding into the aisles. Vivian had never seen the whole town in one place before. The sight made her stomach drop. Dalton stood at the front near the pulpit, his deputies flanking him. He looked calm, confident, like he'd already won. Mrs. Chen led Vivian and Ronan to the front row. The walk down the center aisle felt like a mile. Vivian heard the whispers, felt the weight of every eye on her, some curious, some hostile, some pitying. She sat down and tried to breathe. Tommy Bridgers stood up to speak first. He explained what had happened on the mountain, Vivian's arrival, Ronan's injuries, the rescue. He talked about Dalton's accusations of kidnapping and how they didn't match the facts. People listened. Vivian couldn't tell if they believed him. Then Dalton stood up to rebut. He was smooth, practiced. He painted Vivian as a naive woman who'd been taken advantage of. He portrayed Ronan as a dangerous criminal who'd manipulated her. He made it sound reasonable, logical. Vivian felt her courage wavering. Dalton was good at this. He knew how to work a crowd. how to make people see what he wanted them to see. Mrs. Chen spoke next, her voice cutting through Dalton's polish like acid. She talked about the bruise on Vivian's face, about the way Dalton had lost his temper in front of witnesses. She questioned why the sheriff was so determined to go after Ronan's land, what his real motivations were. The crowd started murmuring, divided. Some agreed with Mrs. Chen, others looked skeptical. Then it was Vivian's turn. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the front. Every face in the room was turned toward her, judging, waiting for her to fail. Vivian opened her mouth and nothing came out. Panic flooded her. She couldn't do this. She wasn't brave enough, wasn't strong enough. Then she felt Ronan's presence behind her. He hadn't moved from his seat, but she could feel him there. Solid, unwavering. She thought about everything she'd survived. The blizzard, the grizzly wounds, Dalton's violence. Every person who'd ever told her she couldn't. She found her voice. "My name is Vivian Mercer," she said. The words came out steadier than she expected. "Most of you know me as the nurse nobody wanted. The fat woman who showed up here 2 years ago and tried to practice medicine in a town that already had a doctor." Someone in the back snickered. Vivian ignored it. "Sheriff Reeves is right about one thing. I am naive. I was naive enough to think that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself enough, people would see past what I looked like. I was naive enough to believe that truth mattered more than appearances." She paused, making herself look at the crowd. Really look. "But I'm not naive anymore. I know now that men like Sheriff Reeves don't care about truth. They care about power, and they'll say whatever they have to say to keep it." Dalton started to stand, but Mrs. Chen shot him a look that could have melted steel. He sat back down. "The sheriff says Ronan Vale kidnapped me. That's a lie. I went to his cabin of my own free will to provide medical care. I stayed because he needed that care and because the storm made travel impossible. During that time, Ronan never once hurt me, threatened me, or prevented me from leaving." Vivian's voice grew stronger. "You want to know what actually happened? Sheriff Reeves saw an opportunity. He's been trying to get control of Ronan's land for months, and when I went up that mountain, he saw a way to frame an innocent man. He spread lies about kidnapping. He tried to abduct me when I came back to testify, and when that didn't work, he planned to kill Ronan and make it look like an accident." The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Dalton's face had gone dark with rage. "How dare you?" He started, but Vivian cut him off. "I dare because I have nothing left to lose. You've already made it clear what you think of me. The whole town has. So I'm done caring what you think. I'm done apologizing for existing in a body you don't approve of. I'm done letting men like you decide what I'm allowed to do with my life." She turned to face Dalton directly. "You hit me in front of witnesses because you thought you could get away with it. You tried to kidnap me because you thought nobody would care what happened to someone like me. And you planned to murder Ronan because you thought his life didn't matter." Vivian's hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver. "You were wrong. My life matters. Ronan's life matters. And this town deserves better than a sheriff who treats people like obstacles to be removed whenever they get in his way." The church had gone completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "So here's what I'm asking," Vivian said, addressing the whole room now. "I'm asking you to look past what you've been told to believe. Look at the facts. Look at what Sheriff Reeves has actually done, and then decide if this is the kind of man you want protecting you." She walked back to her seat on trembling legs. As she sat down, Ronan's hand found hers and squeezed. The room erupted in noise, people arguing, shouting, some in support and some in opposition. It took Tommy and Mrs. Chen 10 minutes to restore order. When the vote finally happened, it wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Dalton Reeves was no longer the sheriff of Black Hollow Ridge. The aftermath was chaos. Dalton's supporters stormed out, several of them making threats. But enough people stayed. Enough people who were tired of being afraid, tired of looking the other way. Dalton himself stood frozen at the front of the church, his badge in his hand. Someone had demanded he turn it in immediately. He looked at Vivian with such pure hatred that she felt it like a physical blow. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Yes, it is," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You're done here, Dalton. Pack your things and leave town, quietly." "Or what?" "Or we arrest you for assault and attempted kidnapping. Your choice." For a moment, Vivian thought he might try something violent. His hand twitched toward his gun, and Ronan was on his feet in an instant, moving to intercept. But Dalton wasn't that stupid. Not with this many witnesses. He threw the badge on the floor and walked out, his remaining supporters trailing behind him. The tension in the room shattered. People started talking all at once, some coming up to Vivian to shake her hand or thank her. Others approached Ronan warily, as if seeing him properly for the first time. Tommy made his way through the crowd. Hell of a speech. Vivian was still shaking. I thought I was going to pass out. You didn't look it. You looked fearless. I was terrified. Same thing sometimes. Tommy glanced at Ronan. You doing okay? Been better. Been worse. Ronan's hand was still in Vivian's, holding tight. Thanks for backing us up. Somebody had to. Should have done it sooner. Mrs. Chen appeared with cups of water. Drink? Both of you. Before you fall over. Vivian drank gratefully. Her throat was raw from speaking, and her whole body felt like it might collapse. What happens now? She asked. Now we pick a new sheriff. Have an actual election instead of just accepting whoever the territorial governor sends us. Mrs. Chen smiled. And you two get to decide what you want to do next. Vivian looked at Ronan. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I don't know, she admitted. I hadn't thought past tonight. Well, you've got time to figure it out, Mrs. Chen said. But for what it's worth, this town could use a nurse who actually gives a damn. And we could use a reminder that not everyone who looks different is dangerous. She left them alone in the crowd. Vivian leaned into Ronan, exhausted beyond measure. We did it, she said. You did it. I just stood there looking threatening. You're good at that. Years of practice. Ronan's arm came around her shoulders. Vivian, what she said about staying, is that something you'd want? Vivian thought about it. Thought about the clinic she'd built, the few patients who'd trusted her, the possibility of actually belonging somewhere. But she also thought about the way most of the town still looked at her, the whispers that hadn't stopped, the years it would take to change minds that had already decided what she was worth. I don't know, she said honestly. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to prove that I can make it work here. But another part just wants to go somewhere where I don't have to fight for every inch of respect. Both make sense. What do you want? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. I want whatever keeps you safe and happy. If that's here, I'll stay. If it's somewhere else, I'll go. Simple as that. It's not that simple, isn't it? Vivian, I spent 5 years alone on that mountain because I couldn't figure out how to live in the world without the people I loved. Then you showed up and reminded me what it feels like to have something worth living for. He turned to face her fully. Wherever you go, I'm going too. The rest is just details. Vivian felt tears prickling her eyes. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. That's depressing. You deserve better than me fumbling through feelings. No, I deserve exactly this. She kissed him, not caring who saw or what they thought. I deserve someone who sees me, really sees me. And that's you. When they finally left the church, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and red. The town looked different in this light, softer, almost welcoming. But Vivian knew better than to trust appearances. Some things took more than one speech to change. Still, as she and Ronan walked toward the stable to collect their horses, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe not for this town, maybe not for easy acceptance or quick forgiveness, but hope that she'd finally found someone who didn't need her to be smaller, quieter, less herself. Hope that wherever they ended up, it would be a place they chose together. And for now, that was enough. They didn't leave that night. Vivian had expected to, had been ready to pack up and disappear before Dalton could regroup. But Mrs. Chen insisted they stay at her house, and Tommy offered to keep watch through the night in case trouble came looking. Trouble didn't come. At least not the kind Vivian had been expecting. She woke on Mrs. Chen's spare bed to the sound of voices downstairs. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The town meeting, the vote, the look on Dalton's face as he'd thrown down his badge. Ronan was already awake, sitting in a chair by the window with his rifle across his lap. He hadn't slept, she could tell. The shadows under his eyes were too dark. You should have woken me, she said, sitting up. We could have taken turns. You needed the rest more than I did. That's not how partnerships work. He almost smiled.
I'm still figuring out how partnerships work. Been a while. Vivian crossed to him and pressed her hand to his forehead. Still warm, but not feverish. The wounds were holding, small mercies. What's happening downstairs? She asked. People. Lots of them. Ronan gestured toward the window. Started arriving about an hour ago. Vivian looked out and her stomach dropped. There were at least 20 people gathered in front of Mrs. Chen's house. Some she recognized from the town meeting. Others were strangers. What do they want? No idea, but they don't look angry, if that helps. It didn't particularly. Vivian had learned not to trust crowds, even friendly ones. They could turn on you faster than weather. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen making coffee, her expression somewhere between amused and exasperated. Morning, she said. Hope you slept well because you're about to have a busy day. What's going on? People want to talk to you. Been showing up since dawn. Mrs. Chen poured coffee into 2 cups and handed one to Vivian. Some want to apologize, some want to thank you, and a few want to offer work. Work? Medical work. Seems like word got around about what you did for Vale, keeping a man alive who should have died from those injuries. Folks are starting to think maybe you know what you're doing after all. Vivian's throat went tight. She'd been fighting for this kind of recognition since she'd arrived in Black Hollow Ridge, and now that it was happening, she didn't know what to do with it. I need to think about this, she said. No pressure, but don't take too long. Some of those people out there have been waiting a while. Mrs. Chen sipped her coffee. For what it's worth, I think you should stay. Town needs someone like you. Town spent 2 years making it clear they didn't want someone like me. People are stupid. Doesn't mean they can't learn. Ronan came down the stairs, moving carefully. Vivian saw several of the people outside stiffen when they spotted him through the window. Old fear died hard. I should go, he said quietly. I'm making them nervous. Let them be nervous, Vivian said. You're not going anywhere without me. Vivian, I mean it. We do this together or not at all, remember? He looked like he wanted to argue, but Mrs. Chen cut in. She's right. You two are a package deal now, whether this town likes it or not. They want her skills. They get both of you. Simple as that. The first person Vivian spoke to was a woman named Sarah Carmichael. She had a daughter with a fever that wouldn't break, and Doc Brennan had told her there was nothing to be done except wait and pray. But I heard what you did for Mr. Vale, Sarah said, her hands twisting in her apron. And I thought, maybe you could look at her, please? Vivian agreed. She rode out to the Carmichael homestead with her medical bag, Ronan trailing behind on his horse like a shadow. The daughter was 8 years old, her skin hot and dry, her breathing shallow. It took Vivian less than 5 minutes to diagnose pneumonia. She stayed for 2 days, treating the girl with steam inhalations and willow bark tea, teaching Sarah how to position her daughter so her lungs could drain. By the 3rd day, the fever had broken. Sarah cried when she thanked her. Doc Brennan said she was dying, said there wasn't nothing anyone could do. Doc Brennan's an idiot, Vivian said bluntly, and drunk half the time. Your daughter was sick, but she wasn't dying. She just needed someone who knew what they were looking at. Word spread fast after that. Within a week, Vivian had treated 3 more cases, a broken arm that had been set wrong and needed to be rebroken, an infected wound that Doc Brennan had been treating with whiskey and hope, and a difficult birth that would have killed both mother and baby if Vivian hadn't been there. People started coming to her instead of Brennan. Not everyone. Some folks still preferred the familiar incompetence of the town drunk to the uncertain skills of a fat woman. But enough that Vivian found herself busier than she'd been in 2 years. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt complicated. I don't know if I can do this, she told Ronan one night. They were back at his cabin, their cabin now, she supposed, though they hadn't talked about it explicitly. She'd been spending more nights up here than in town, and her belongings had started migrating to the shelves beside his. Do what? Stay here. Pretend like everything's fine now, just because they need me. Vivian paced the small space, her frustration bubbling over. 2 weeks ago, these same people were laughing at me, calling me names, treating me like I was too stupid to know my own profession. Now they want me to save their children and fix their broken bones, and I'm supposed to just, what, forgive them? Ronan watched her from the bed, his expression unreadable. You don't have to forgive them. Then what am I supposed to do? Whatever you want. Stay. Leave. Tell them all to go to hell. He shifted, wincing slightly. The wounds were healing, but they still pulled. Vivian, you don't owe these people anything. You never did. But they need help. That's not the same as you being obligated to give it. She stopped pacing. I became a nurse to help people. If I turn my back on them just because they were cruel to me, what does that make me? Human. Ronan stood and crossed to her. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to protect yourself. Nobody would blame you for walking away. I'd blame me. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Then stay. But stay because you want to, not because you think you have to prove something. What if I don't know the difference anymore? Then we'll figure it out together. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Ronan tensed immediately, his hand moving toward the rifle, but Vivian put a hand on his arm. I'll get it. It was Tommy Bridger, looking exhausted and worried. Miss Mercer, sorry to bother you this late, but we've got a problem. What kind of problem? Dalton kind of problem. Vivian's stomach sank. What's he done? He's holed up at his old property with about 6 of his supporters. Been making threats about burning down the town if we don't reinstate him as sheriff. He's bluffing. Maybe. But he's also been drinking for 3 days straight, and drunk men do stupid things. Tommy glanced past her to Ronan. We could use your help. Both of you. Ronan appeared at Vivian's shoulder. What kind of help? The talking kind, hopefully, but the shooting kind if it comes to that. Tommy's expression was grim. Nobody else wants to go near him. They're all scared he'll make good on his threats. So you came to us because we're expendable? Vivian said dryly. I came to you because you're the only ones brave enough or crazy enough to face him down. Tommy held up his hands. Look, I know it's asking a lot, but if we don't handle this now, people are going to get hurt, and I'd rather it not be innocent people. Vivian looked at Ronan. He raised an eyebrow, leaving the decision to her. She thought about walking away, about letting the town deal with its own mess. They'd certainly never rushed to help her when she'd needed it. But then she thought about Sarah Carmichael and her daughter, about the mother whose life she'd saved during childbirth, about all the people who were just trying to survive in a hard place and didn't deserve to burn because one man couldn't handle losing power. Damn it, she muttered. Fine, but I'm not going unarmed. Dalton's property was at the edge of town, a ramshackle house with a barn that had seen better days. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Vivian could see figures moving inside. Armed figures. She, Ronan, and Tommy stopped about 50 yards out, far enough to avoid immediate gunfire, close enough to be heard. Dalton, Tommy called. We need to talk. A window shutter banged open and Dalton appeared, a bottle in one hand and a pistol in the other. He looked terrible, unshaven, wild-eyed, drunk enough that he was swaying. Nothing to talk about, he shouted. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Nobody wants trouble, Tommy said. Just come out, and we can work this out peacefully. Peacefully? Dalton laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You took my badge, my reputation. You chose that whore and her monster over me. Vivian felt Ronan go rigid beside her. His hand tightened on his rifle. Don't, she said quietly. That's what he wants. He wants you to lose control so he can justify whatever he's planning. He just called you. I know what he called me. I don't care. She raised her voice. Dalton, this is Vivian, the whore you're so worked up about. Vivian, Tommy started, but she waved him off. You want to blame someone for losing your job? Blame me. I'm the one who stood up in front of everyone and called you out. I'm the one who told the truth about what you did. Dalton stumbled closer to the window. You ruined me. No, you ruined yourself. You hit me. You tried to kidnap me. You planned to murder an innocent man for his land. I just made sure people knew about it. I was protecting this town. You were protecting your wallet. Vivian stepped forward, ignoring Tommy's hiss of warning. You're not the victim here, Dalton. You're a bully who finally got called out, and you can't handle it. So now you're making threats because that's all you have left. I could burn this whole place down. You could, but you won't. You know why? Vivian was close enough now to see his bloodshot eyes, the tremor in his hands. Because deep down, you're a coward. You only fight when you know you'll win. And right now, you've already lost. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you're drunk and scared and desperate. I know you're holding that gun because you think it makes you powerful, but really, it just makes you pathetic." She stopped about 20 feet from the house. "And I know that whatever you're planning, it's not going to work. The town's moved on. They don't want you back. And threatening to burn everything down just proves they were right to get rid of you." For a long moment, Dalton just stared at her. Then his face crumpled. Not with sadness, but with rage so pure it was terrifying. He raised the pistol. Ronan fired first. The shot hit Dalton's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning away. Dalton screamed and fell back from the window. Inside the house, chaos erupted. Men were shouting, scrambling. One of them appeared at the door with his hands up. "Don't shoot! We're coming out!" They filed out one by one, 6 men, all of them looking more scared than dangerous. Dalton's supporters, what was left of them. Tommy moved forward to disarm them, while Ronan kept his rifle trained on the door. Dalton was the last one out, clutching his bleeding hand and cursing. Vivian walked up to him, and he flinched back. "You shot me," he said, disbelieving. "I didn't. He did." Vivian nodded toward Ronan. "And he was aiming for your hand. If he'd wanted you dead, you would be." She knelt down and grabbed his injured hand. He tried to pull away, but she held firm, examining the wound with professional detachment. "You'll live. Bullet went straight through. You're lucky. Nothing broken." She pulled a bandage from her bag and wrapped it tight enough to make him gasp. "There. Now you can spend the rest of your life remembering what it cost you to underestimate a fat woman and the man who loves her." Dalton's eyes were full of hate, but underneath it she saw something else. Fear. He was afraid of her, of what she represented, the fact that people like him didn't always win. "What happens to me now?" he asked. Tommy stepped forward. "You're leaving, tonight, and you're not coming back, ever." "This is my town." "Not anymore." Tommy's voice was hard. "You've got 1 hour to pack whatever you can carry. After that, if you're still here, we arrest you for assault and attempted murder. Your choice." Dalton looked around at the men who'd supported him. None of them would meet his eyes. His little rebellion had lasted less than an hour. "Fine," he spat. "Keep your backwater hellhole. See how long you last without me." "We'll manage," Vivian said. They watched him stagger back into the house. Tommy posted 2 men to make sure he actually left, then turned to Vivian and Ronan. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest," he said. "Probably both," Vivian admitted. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Is it over?" "Yeah, it's over." But it wasn't. Not quite. An hour later, as promised, Dalton rode out of Black Hollow Ridge. He had a pack horse loaded with his belongings and a bandage wrapped around his hand. He didn't look at anyone as he passed, just kept his eyes fixed on the mountains. Vivian watched him go from the porch of Mrs. Chen's house. She felt Ronan's presence beside her, solid and warm. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. "No. Men like him, once they lose, really lose, they don't come back. They just find somewhere else to ruin. That's depressing. That's reality." Ronan was quiet for a moment. "You did good today. Talking him down like that." "I didn't talk him down. You shot him. After you gave him a chance to walk away. That's more than he deserved." Vivian leaned into him, exhausted. "I'm tired of fighting." "I know. I want—" She stopped, not sure how to put it into words. "I want to wake up and not wonder if someone's going to try to hurt us. I want to do my work without having to prove I deserve to do it. I want to just exist without it being a battle. So let's do that." She looked up at him. "Here? Wherever you want. Here. The cabin. Somewhere else entirely." Ronan's arm came around her shoulders. "Vivian, I meant what I said. Wherever you go, I'm going too. You want to stay in town and build a real practice? I'll help. You want to leave and never look back? I'll pack tonight. You want to stay in the mountains and only come down when someone's dying? We'll do that too. What do you want?" "I want you safe. I want you happy. Everything else is negotiable." Vivian thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the cabin, isolated and beautiful, a place where she'd learned what it felt like to be seen instead of judged. She thought about the town, complicated and messy, full of people who needed help even if they didn't always deserve it. She thought about who she'd been when she'd arrived in Black Hollow Ridge.
angry and defensive and desperate to prove herself. And she thought about who she was now, still angry, still defensive, but also stronger, braver, more certain of her own worth. "I want to try," she said finally. "I want to try staying here, building something real, but I need to know we have a way out if it doesn't work. I need to know that if the town turns on us again, if people go back to treating us like we're less than human, I need to know we can leave." "Always," Ronan said. "The cabin's ours. Nobody can take that. If things get bad, we go there and we don't come back. Deal?" "Deal." They stayed on Mrs. Chen's porch until the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. The town was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Vivian allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. The first month was hard. People were friendlier than they'd been, but old habits died slow. Vivian still heard whispers when she walked down Main Street, still saw the sidelong looks, the judgment in some people's eyes. But she also saw change. Sarah Carmichael stopped by the clinic with fresh bread every week, a quiet thank you that said more than words. Tommy Bridger spread the word about her skills, sending people her way when they needed real medical help. Mrs. Chen became something like a friend, the kind who told you when you were being an idiot and helped you anyway. Doc Brennan left town after 2 weeks, unable to compete with someone who actually knew what they were doing. Vivian felt a brief flash of guilt about that, but it passed quickly. He'd been dangerous, treating people with outdated methods and whiskey-soaked guesswork. The town was better off without him. Ronan came down from the cabin 3 times a week, helping with heavy lifting and dealing with the patients who were still nervous around Vivian. His presence was calming in a strange way. People seemed less likely to cause trouble when a 6'5" mountain man was standing in the corner. Slowly, grudgingly, the town started to accept them. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who refused to let Vivian treat them, who crossed the street to avoid Ronan. There were still nights when Vivian lay awake wondering if they'd made the right choice, if staying was worth the constant low-level hostility. But there were also moments that made it worth it. Like the day a young woman came to the clinic, terrified and bleeding, and whispered that her husband had hurt her. Vivian treated her injuries and helped her disappear to a cousin's house 2 towns over, and when the husband came looking, Ronan met him at the door with a rifle and a promise that if he ever touched his wife again, they'd never find his body. Like the night Tommy stopped by the cabin with a bottle of whiskey and asked Ronan's advice about courting Sarah Carmichael. They sat by the fire talking until dawn, and Vivian realized that Ronan was making a friend, something he hadn't had in 5 years. Like the morning Mrs. Chen showed up at the clinic with fabric for new curtains and insisted on helping Vivian hang them, talking the whole time about how the place needed a woman's touch and how Vivian should stop living like she was ready to run at any moment. Small moments. Small changes, but they added up. 3 months after Dalton left, the town held a proper election for sheriff. Tommy won by a landslide. His first official act was to deputize Ronan over the protests of several townspeople who still didn't trust him. "Figured if we're doing things right, we should have someone who knows the mountains," Tommy said, "and someone who's not afraid to stand up to dangerous men." Ronan accepted with visible reluctance. "I'm not good with people." "You don't have to be good with them. You just have to protect them." "What if they don't want my protection?" "Then they can take it up with me." Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. "Besides, Vivian needs someone watching her back when she's out on calls. Might as well make it official." That was how they ended up working together. Vivian treating the sick and injured, Ronan making sure nobody gave her trouble while she did it. It was an unusual arrangement, but it worked. The cabin became their refuge. They'd spend days in town, working until exhaustion set in, and then retreat to the mountains for a few days of quiet. Vivian learned to trap and hunt alongside Ronan. He learned basic first aid from her, enough to handle emergencies when she wasn't around. They built a life together in the spaces between town and wilderness, belonging fully to neither but carving out something that was entirely theirs. 6 months in, Vivian realized she was happy. Not perfectly, seamlessly happy. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt and anger and frustration. But underneath it all, there was a contentment she'd never felt before. She mentioned it to Ronan one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the cabin, watching stars come out over the mountains. "I think I'm happy," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "You think?" "I'm not used to it. Keeps catching me off guard." Ronan smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Good. You deserve to be happy. So do you. Yeah, well, working on it. He reached for her hand. Easier with you around. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing someone well enough that words weren't always necessary. I've been thinking, Ronan said after a while, about what you said, about needing an escape route. Vivian's stomach tightened. Are you saying we should leave? No, I'm saying maybe we don't need one anymore. He turned to face her fully. Vivian, we've been living like we're temporary. Like any day now, everything's going to fall apart and we'll have to run. But maybe it's time to stop waiting for that to happen. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we build something permanent. Fix up this cabin properly. Maybe add a room, plant a garden. Stop acting like we're just passing through.
Vivian's throat went tight. You want to stay. Really stay. I want to stay where you are. If that's here, then yeah, I want to stay. She thought about it. Thought about the town that had slowly, grudgingly started to accept them. Thought about the work that mattered, the lives they'd saved. Thought about this cabin and the mountains and the man beside her who'd somehow become her entire world. Okay, she said, let's build something permanent. The winter that followed was brutal. Storms rolled in off the mountains with a vengeance, burying the town under feet of snow. Vivian was busier than ever, treating frostbite and pneumonia and all the ailments that came with people trying to survive in a place that actively wanted them dead. She delivered 3 babies that winter. One of them, a girl born blue and silent, she managed to revive through sheer stubborn determination and techniques she'd read about but never tried. The mother named the baby Vivian, and when word got around, something shifted in the town. People started looking at her differently. Not with pity or contempt, but with respect. It was a strange feeling. Ronan spent the winter fortifying the cabin and learning how to make furniture. The room he'd promised appeared slowly, rough and uneven, but solid. He built a bed frame big enough for both of them, a table that didn't wobble, shelves for Vivian's growing collection of medical texts. They talked about the future sometimes, about whether they'd ever make it official, get married in the church with the whole town watching. Vivian wasn't sure she wanted that, the spectacle of it, the performance, but she liked the idea of being bound to Ronan in some tangible way. We could do it privately, he suggested one night. Just us, and whoever we want there. Skip the whole town celebration. Mrs. Chen would never forgive us. Mrs. Chen would understand. They decided to wait. There was no rush. They already belonged to each other in all the ways that mattered. Spring came slowly, melting the snow and revealing a world scrubbed clean. Vivian planted a garden behind the cabin, herbs for medicine, vegetables for food. Ronan built a fence to keep the deer out and pretended he didn't care that half the plants died anyway. You're terrible at this, Vivian said, surveying the casualties. It's my first garden. Give me time. How much time? However long it takes to figure out what I'm doing. She kissed him, dirt-streaked and exhausted and ridiculously happy. Fair enough. The town continued to change. Tommy proved to be a good sheriff. Fair but firm, willing to listen but not afraid to act when necessary. New people arrived, drawn by rumors of available land and a fresh start. Some of them looked at Vivian and Ronan with curiosity instead of judgment, which was a welcome change. Doc Harrison, a real doctor, trained and certified, arrived in late spring. He was young and idealistic and immediately sought out Vivian to compare notes. They formed an unlikely partnership, him handling the cases that required surgery or complex diagnosis, her managing everything else. You're wasted in a place like this, he told her once. You should be teaching, training other nurses. Maybe someday, Vivian said, but she wasn't ready to leave, not yet. A year after Dalton's departure, Vivian was called to a homestead 15 miles out. A man had been injured in a logging accident, his leg crushed beneath a fallen tree. Doc Harrison was away on another call, which left Vivian to handle it alone. Ronan rode with her, silent and watchful. The injury was bad. The leg would have to come off, or infection would kill the man within days. Vivian had assisted with amputations before, but she'd never performed one solo. I don't know if I can do this, she said, looking at the mangled limb. The man's wife was crying,
His children were huddled in the corner. There was no time to wait for Doc Harrison. "Yes, you can," Ronan said quietly. "I've seen what you can do. You've got this." Vivian took a breath and got to work. It took 3 hours. She amputated below the knee, working with shaking hands and fierce concentration. Ronan assisted, following her instructions without question, his presence a steady anchor when her nerve threatened to fail. When it was done, when the stump was stitched and bandaged and the man was sedated, Vivian walked outside and threw up behind the barn. Ronan found her there, wiping her mouth with trembling hands. "He's going to live," Ronan said. "You saved his life." "I took his leg." "You saved his life," Ronan repeated firmly. "That man has a wife and 3 kids who still have a husband and father because of what you did. Don't diminish that." Vivian leaned against him, exhausted beyond measure. "I hate this sometimes, the weight of it, knowing that if I make one wrong move, someone dies. I know, but you keep doing it anyway. That's what makes you brave." "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." "Same thing." They stayed at the homestead for 2 days, making sure the man stabilized and teaching his wife how to care for the wound. When they finally rode back to Black Hollow Ridge, word had already spread. Vivian had performed an amputation, alone, successfully. People looked at her with something approaching awe. She hated it and loved it in equal measure. That summer, Mrs. Chen approached Vivian with a proposal. "I'm getting old," she said bluntly. "Store's getting to be too much for me. I need help running it. I'm a nurse, not a shopkeeper. You're a woman who knows how to manage things, and you're someone people trust." Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to give up medicine. I'm asking you to help me keep this town supplied while you do it. We could be partners." It was tempting. The clinic didn't generate much income. Most people paid in trade goods or promises. Having a stake in the general store would mean stability, real financial security. "Can I think about it?" Vivian asked. "Take your time, but not too long. I'm not getting any younger." Vivian discussed it with Ronan that night. He listened carefully, then said, "Do you want to do it?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should focus on medicine. That's what I'm good at." "You're good at a lot of things, and there's no rule that says you can't do more than one." "What if I'm spreading myself too thin?" "Then you cut back." "But Vivian, you've spent your whole life being told you can't do things. Maybe it's time to see how much you can do when nobody's standing in your way." She took Mrs. Chen's offer. The partnership worked better than Vivian had expected. She handled the medical supplies and some of the day-to-day operations, while Mrs. Chen managed the finances and dealt with suppliers. It freed up time for both of them and gave Vivian a steadier income than she'd ever had. More importantly, it gave her a place in the town that wasn't just about being useful in emergencies. She became someone people saw every day, someone woven into the fabric of Black Hollow Ridge in ordinary ways. It changed how people looked at her. She wasn't just the nurse anymore. She was a businesswoman, a partner, someone with a stake in the town's future. 2 years after Dalton left, Vivian stood in the cabin she shared with Ronan and realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had called her fat as an insult. People still saw her size, she wasn't invisible, but it had stopped being the only thing they saw. Now she was Vivian Mercer, the nurse who'd saved dozens of lives. Vivian Mercer, who ran the general store with Mrs. Chen. Vivian Mercer, who lived in the mountains with Ronan Vale and didn't care what anyone thought about it. She'd become someone in her own right, not in spite of her body, but alongside it. That winter, Ronan asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the fire in the cabin, Vivian mending clothes and Ronan carving something from a piece of wood. The proposal came out of nowhere, quiet and simple. "Will you marry me?" Vivian's hands stilled. "What?" "Marry me, or don't. I want you to know that's what I want, if you want it too." She set down her mending and looked at him. Really looked. He was scarred and rough around the edges, a man who'd survived more pain than anyone should have to. But he was also gentle and steady and the safest place she'd ever found. "Yes," she said. "Yeah?" "Yeah." They married in the spring, in the church where Vivian had once stood up to Dalton Reeves. Mrs. Chen and Tommy stood with them. Doc Harrison attended, along with Sarah Carmichael and her daughter, and about half the town. It wasn't perfect. Some people stayed away, still uncomfortable with the idea of Vivian and Ronan together. But enough people came that the church felt full, warm with bodies and goodwill.
Vivian wore a dress Mrs. Chen had helped her make. Simple blue cotton that fit her properly instead of trying to hide her. Ronan wore clothes that actually looked clean for once, his hair trimmed and his beard neat. They said their vows in front of everyone, and when Ronan kissed her, the church erupted in cheers. Afterward, there was a celebration in the street, music and food and dancing that lasted until the sun set. Vivian danced with Ronan, with Tommy, with Mrs. Chen, with people who'd once looked at her like she was nothing. At one point, she stepped away from the crowd to catch her breath. She stood at the edge of town, looking up at the mountains where this had all started. Tommy found her there. "You okay?" "Yeah, just taking it all in. It's a good day." "It is," Vivian smiled. "Never thought I'd have this. Any of this." "You earned it, you and Ronan both." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "You know, when you first got here, I didn't think you'd last a month. Thought the town would chew you up and spit you out. You weren't wrong to think that. They almost did. But you didn't let them. You fought back. And now look, half the town loves you, and the other half's too scared to cross you." Vivian laughed. "I don't think that's quite accurate." "Close enough." Tommy nudged her shoulder. "Come on. Your husband's looking for you." Husband. The word still felt strange. Good, but strange. She went back to the celebration, to Ronan and the life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and hope. Years passed. The cabin gained more rooms, a proper porch, a garden that actually produced food. The town continued to grow and change. New families arrived. Old prejudices slowly faded, replaced by new problems and new solutions. Vivian trained 2 young women as nurses, passing on everything she'd learned. Doc Harrison eventually left for a bigger town with more opportunities, but by then Vivian didn't need him. She could handle most things on her own. Ronan became something of a legend in the surrounding territories, the mountain man who'd married the town nurse, who could track anything through any weather, who'd once faced down a corrupt sheriff and lived to tell about it. They had arguments. Hard ones. The kind where they slept on opposite sides of the bed and didn't talk for days. But they always came back to each other because leaving was never really an option. They had losses too. Mrs. Chen died in her sleep one winter, peaceful and old. The funeral was packed, and Vivian cried harder than she'd expected. Tommy remarried after his first wife died in childbirth, a tragedy Vivian couldn't prevent despite everything she tried. Life was hard and beautiful and messy and real. One evening, 15 years after that first blizzard ride, Vivian sat on the porch with Ronan and watched the sunset. They were older now, grayer, carrying the weight of years in their bones and scars. "Do you ever regret it?" Ronan asked. "Staying here instead of going somewhere easier?" Vivian thought about it. "Sometimes. When the winters are bad or when someone dies that I couldn't save. But mostly, no. This is where I learned who I was. This is where I stopped apologizing for existing. You never should have had to apologize." "No, but I did anyway, until I met someone who saw me differently." She reached for his hand. "You saved me, you know. That first night when you let me in, when you trusted me. You saved me as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," Ronan said. "Still do, every day." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. The town below was quiet, peaceful. Their town now, in a way it hadn't been at the beginning. Vivian thought about the woman she'd been 15 years ago, angry and defensive and desperate to prove she mattered. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But it had been worth it. Every frozen mile, every fight, every moment of doubt and fear and stubborn hope. She'd learned that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and doing the thing anyway. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but someone who saw your flaws and chose you regardless. That belonging wasn't given. It was built, piece by painful piece, until you'd created something that couldn't be taken away. Most importantly, she'd learned that the opinions of people who refused to see her worth didn't define her. Only she could do that, and she'd decided she was enough, exactly as she was. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the mountains. Ronan squeezed her hand and Vivian squeezed back. They'd survived everything the world had thrown at them, and they'd do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that followed.
Because that's what survivors did.
They kept going. They built lives from broken pieces. They loved fiercely and fought harder and refused to disappear just because someone else thought they should. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the approval of a town that had once rejected them. Not the validation they'd once desperately sought. Just this. Two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and decided that was enough to build a world on. It was more than enough.
It was everything.